Hey everyone, how are you doing? So good that you're joining us tonight for the live stream. It's been a while since I've done a live stream, like 2 months or so. It's been a pretty hectic couple of months, unfortunately, so I wasn't able to do a live stream for the past few weeks. But I'm really happy that you're here and that we're live again tonight. Perhaps you recognize that some things have changed. I've done a little bit of redecoration. I thought the background was a bit dark, so I painted it whiter, but then I also moved around some stuff, and so this is what the new setup looks like. So let me know what you think. Before I want to start with the live stream, just a few updates, and also have a question for you. So last week I was at a Python conference in Groningen, which is in the northern part of the Netherlands. It's called PyGrun, and it was really fun. It's the biggest Python conference in the Netherlands. Actually, there were like, I don't know, 350 people. It was really cool to meet everybody, had lots of fun talks with everybody. So let me know if you actually also went to this same conference and you happen to be in the live stream now. Just let me know by posting a message. And I'm also wondering, like, what kind of conferences are you visiting? Are you joining conferences actually? So I know, of course, there's PyCon in the US, but are there other conferences that you regularly attend? The reason I'm asking is because I'm making a plan next year to be more, not just in front of the camera, but just be more out there and hopefully meeting more of you guys. So I'd like to know where you hang out. So post, write a comment if you're joining a conference next year, and then I'll see if I can join as well. So next to that, so if you have any question today, just post it in the chat. I'll try to answer as many questions as possible. Just let me know and I'll go through things one by one. Now I already see some chat messages, so let's see, where are you from? I see Jamie from the UK, hey there, and Uche from Nigeria, hi. Hey Davis from Texas, Tala, good that you're here, Xavi, Mats also from the US, great, and Jose from Costa Rica, Michael from Denmark. Really nice that you're here tonight, guys. Lovely, lovely. So I'm going to start with a question by Ajay from the comments section on my community post, which is about Mojo. And the question is if I've tried Mojo and if I have, what are my thoughts about it. So I haven't tried it yet, but I'm definitely interested in it. Did anybody who's here already try Mojo? Did you use it already? And what are your thoughts about it? So I think what's to me sounds really interesting is the fact that it's basically a way more performant version of Python, and especially if you're developing AI tools, can be quite helpful, because those things tend to suck up a lot of performance unless you're just, communicating with the OpenAI API or something like that. But it's definitely interesting. I can also imagine that this is something that I'm going to cover on the channel at some point if more people want to hear me talk about that. So hi from the Netherlands. Good, more Dutch people here. It's always good to hear more Dutch people here. Let's see. Rajowski asks, your opinion on Django compared to other frameworks. Yeah, I must say, I haven't developed a ton of things in Django myself. It looks very complete. It also looks very opinionated. It kind of makes me think of Angular, if I'm supposed to say that, but I have worked with Angular, and it's like pretty opinionated with how you set up things. It's very different from, let's say, a framework like React, which is, well, it's not really a framework, it's more of a rendering library, whereas Angular really provides much more structure, and you have to do it in a very specific way. And when you look at the web development world, you actually see that Angular is, well, kind of on the way out. And I'm not sure what's going to happen with Django. I see that there's a lot of newer Python frameworks like Streamlit, for example, that are much more lightweight and that are basically less opinionated about things. And typically I find that makes my development journey at least easier. So those are my thoughts about it. But to be honest, I haven't developed a ton of stuff in Django, so I might totally change my mind if I really develop a serious application in it. Yes, so let's see, what else do we have? Ajita asks, hey Arjan, have helped me so much. Well, much appreciated, obviously. And okay, dependency injection, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for me, dependency injection is like, I think one of the game changers that really helped me become better at coding. And really the idea of, not creating your objects inside a function, but just pass it to the function. So then it becomes way easier to test. So whenever I have the opportunity to use dependency injection, I actually will do that. So for me, it helps. It definitely helps a lot. Davi asks, I'm a game dev and I'm building a big game for the first time and I'm struggling with a class structure design or how to design my class structures. I've done a bit of game development in the past. Actually, I was teaching at the university a course on game development already a long time ago. That was actually using the Microsoft XNA engine, which is no longer maintained, unfortunately. But there is an open source version called Monogame, which is mostly the same as the old XNA. And that, yeah, I mean, it's pretty challenging to think of what the right class structure is for a particular game, because of course that also depends very much on the type of game you're developing. It's very different for, let's say, a puzzle game like a Sudoku game versus a first-person shooter or something. Your class structure is going to be very different. It's going to have very different kind of objects in it. But also for game development, I would say maybe you shouldn't start with trying to design a whole class structure, but perhaps a more functional approach would also work for games. So start simple with think about the kind of behavior that you want to have and then try to design your game around that. But I mean, it's a bit generic advice. It's a bit hard to say if I don't know the context of your game exactly. Where I ask, is there any way to split the code between folders and subfolders in such a way that you can use the modules in each folder? I currently use environment paths and .n for that requires loading variables in each file. It causes code redundancy, or is there other good practices? Yeah, like packages in Python is a bit weird if you're not used to how that is supposed to work. I think almost everybody who starts programming in Python runs into this issue of whether like, hey, why can't I just import this file? Come on. And to be honest, actually, I think the Python packaging system could be a lot better. I much prefer how it's done in TypeScript. It's much simpler, actually. But I mean, the way that it's set up in Python, well, once you're used to it, it's also not an issue. You just have to make sure that you're not importing things, let's say, from beyond the top level of the package that you're in. And that also makes sense because packages are kind of independent things that you need to be able to supply to others, and the package shouldn't rely on importing something else that's outside of its folder. So if you want to import, if you want to split your code between folders and subfolders, and you want to reuse those things, you have to make sure that they're in the same package. That's the most important thing. And then you can use either relative imports and import these files, modules, relative to the file that you're in, or you can use absolute imports and you start at the root of your package and you work from there. So that's the trade-off. Wyant asks, could you make a course on building a software as service accounting software from scratch using Python? I could. I'm probably not going to do that, but I am actually working on a software architecture course. And if you want to learn more about that, I have a link here. You can go here, you can register there for free. So I'll keep you up to date on what's happening. And the whole aim of this course is to actually build a software as a service like product from scratch, including all the things that are important and that you should think about. And I'm going to cover basically everything related to software architecture, going from the architectural patterns that are useful, but really from a practical point of view, because you will probably never code all of these architectural patterns from scratch yourself, but I'm probably going to approach it more from a perspective of how would you use those, or where do you see those patterns in cloud applications, and how can you benefit most from them? How do these things fit together? So that's going to be more of the approach. But I'm also going to touch on other subjects like security, authentication, integration with other APIs such as payment systems, things like that. So if you want to learn more about that, just go to arjan.codes/architect. It's free. You just enter your email address, and then I'll keep you up to date, and I promise I won't send you any spam. So, Tyler, opinion on Falcon REST framework compared to others? I haven't used that, so I can't really give an opinion about that. Animesh, I'm currently writing unit tests for my web server, which uses Scenic. How do I structure my test as functional and unit test and make sure to test everything with coverage at 95% plus? So one thing that I mentioned earlier is the whole thing about dependency injection. So for me, dependency injection has really been a game changer in also being able to test my software much more easily. And because if you use dependency injection, it means that you can mock those objects, and then you can supply a mock to function without having to do all sorts of patching and complicated things to work around the way that you designed your code. So dependency injection, in my opinion, is like the thing you should do if you want to make sure that your code is easy to test. And that's, to be honest, that's a starting point. And what you're also going to see is if you use dependency injection rigorously, you're going to have one place in your code where you're basically seeing that you're patching up everything. So that's probably the main file where you're just creating all the objects, making the connections between the objects, and that's where you actually build up your application consisting of all these components. And if you do it that way, it means that in your test files, you can actually decide how you're going to patch up things and what you're going to replace by mock, what you're going to replace by fake data, what you're going to connect with each other in order to test what you need to test. And that's, in my opinion, the most important thing. Now, about coverage, I know coverage is like one of the, it's a metric, let's call it like that, I mean, you don't have to get too hung up on reaching a certain percentage, in my opinion. I think one of the problems with a metric like coverage is that it really applies only to unit tests. Like if you have end-to-end tests, you normally don't really have coverage numbers for that. But actually, if you think about the types of tests that you run, end-to-end tests are ridiculously important to do. So by just focusing on coverage, you run the risk that you focus too much on writing unit tests, whereas software testing is not just about writing unit tests. That's also about the other types of tests that you need to run. So don't focus too much on coverage. It's a nice metric, it's useful, but it's not the only thing that's important. And also coverage doesn't say anything, because I can easily write a test of a program that has a coverage of 100%, but actually doesn't really test the code. You still need to think about what are the edge cases that you're going to test that are not caught in if-else statements in the code. So ultimately, coverage is nice, but that's not, it's not the end goal to fully focus on. Let's see. Oz asks, where do you see weaknesses in software developers, and how would you advise people develop? So I've worked over the past months with several companies and development teams, and basically reviewing the code, helping the teams work together more efficiently, produce higher quality code. And one of the things that I really notice is that, and I especially see this a lot in junior developers, is that they have a tendency to want to use the complex features of a language, right? So, oh, Python has classes and inheritance. Let's use classes and inheritance. Oh, Python has decorators and context managers. Let's use that everywhere, without really considering whether that's really necessary, whether it's really helping the quality of the code, making the code easy to understand. And often the result is that you get this kind of patchwork of, quite complex code, and that doesn't make it easier to understand, makes it harder to use, makes it harder to refactor. So my advice to basically anybody is to really simplify, and don't be afraid to not use advanced Python features. It's okay if you don't use decorators or generator expressions or other advanced things of the Python language. That's totally okay. And actually, it's better if you don't have to, because not every developer understands these. That's not an excuse, because you can learn those things, obviously. So if they really bring value and they solve a very specific problem for you, use them. Otherwise, I have always a tendency to keep things as simple as possible, and for me that works best. And sometimes I might use a generator expression, or sometimes I might use inheritance in my code, but that's actually pretty rare. It's much more about always being aware of keeping things as simple and as basic as possible. In my experience, it just makes things easier to manage, to be honest. Let's see. What else do we have here? Jerome asks, do you ever make C++ libraries with Python bindings? I've used that. I've done that in the past, but that was like 20 years ago. When I was part of a research lab, we were working on a graphics engine. I mean, nowadays you wouldn't do that anymore. You would just use Unity or Unreal or something like that. But then we didn't have that. And so we built a graphics engine, which was a combination of Ogre 3D, which is a graphics library written in C++. And I created Python bindings for that. And then basically I used Python as a scripting language to create like the models and the user interface and things like that. And it worked pretty well, actually. So, but nowadays it's not really that useful anymore. I mostly use Python for like quick script writing, if I need to automate some work at my company, for example. And I'm also using it more and more for backends, actually. So I have a number of backend processes at ArjanCodes that are running. For example, things like, I don't know, somebody buys my online course and then I want to automatically generate an invoice that's sent by email. So I use Python for that kind of stuff. I think it's just the best way to go. But also, I've been working a lot lately with Fast API and building API services using Python for the backend. And I actually really like that a lot. So that's, I think, at the moment, my favorite use of Python, writing backends with it. All right, Yazzie asks, hi, Arjan, I have 5 years of experience in data analysis. For the past year, I've been taking web development seriously. I've been building websites to display in my resume. Do you have any advice? Yeah, so, I mean, web development is an area where I think it's going to be one of the first areas that's going to be automated by AI. You see already lots of tools being able to build like simple websites like fully automatically. So I wouldn't focus too much on just creating websites. I think that's, it's going to be hard to make a living in that, and also to distinguish yourself and use that as a showcase. But of course, if you've been doing data analysis, there are lots of interesting things you can do in the area of web development. and let's say data analysis and visualization. And I think that's still an area that's really interesting to look into. There's even a ton of frameworks, platforms in Python that allow you to automatically generate a website from data sets and add visualization, like, Dash and Streamlit and TypePy. There's a couple of these platforms that are really nice. So that's, and everybody needs that kind of stuff. So I think that's a really useful thing to add to your resume. And if you really want to focus more on the web aspect of that, then I would suggest you focus on really web application development and not so much websites. So in particular, look into React and TypeScript. That's like the biggest area of web development at the moment. Still lots of people need it in that area. So if you know that and you know Python, I think you're in a pretty good position. Let's see, Daniel, how would you approach trying to implement clean architecture with Flask? In Java, you've got Gradle to prevent cross-layer imports, but is there a way to achieve that in Python? Yeah, I mean, that's a big difference, of course, between how Python is set up and how a language like Java is set up. So Java is very, I'd say, controlling, and you can impose pretty strong limits on what you can do as a programmer. I mean, you already see that when you build a simple project. I mean, you already have to put in a class. It needs to have a static main method. You can't use single functions. You have to make things public, or otherwise you can access them externally. So there's lots of restrictions that, well, on the one hand, help you as developer to control who can access what part of your code and how your code is being used. But Python's point of view is very different. That's more of the developer being a more responsible person. I'm not sure that's actually a good way to approach it, but I think it does fit better with the idea of being a scripting language that you give more freedom. That's why JavaScript is also very open and flexible, similar to Python. So that means that in Python, it's actually hard to impose like strict limits on things. Even if you like add sort of semi-private members to classes, you can actually still access them. It's not private, it's just name mangling. So I don't know of any strict way of implementing these kinds of rules in Python and Flask. So you would have to start with your own responsibility as a developer and making the, let's say, the best option, the way that you want to set up things, also the easiest option. Because, well, developers are lazy people. So if the easiest thing also happens to be the best thing, that's a win-win for everybody. It's maybe not really a very helpful answer, but that's how I think about it. Lucas says, do you know any public Flask REST API repository or reference? I'd like to have an idea of different types of application architecture using Flask. I've been mainly using Fast API over the past month, so I haven't really looked a lot at Flask projects. When I do use Flask is mostly if I'm deploying Cloud Functions, so that still relies heavily on Flask in the background. I don't know a specific repository for a Flask application that you can look at them. I'm sure there's like a ton of them on GitHub, but I don't know any specific one. Jerome, are you for spaces or a tab person? I'm a VS Code default settings person. I'm not even sure anymore what's the default thing. I think it's 4 spaces, if I remember correctly, but it's been a while since I looked at it. Yazid, can I share my website for your feedback? I don't really do feedback on websites, like design or things like that. But yeah, you could send an email, but I'm not sure I will have time to look at it, to be honest. František says, hi from Czech Republic. Do you think it's a good idea to mix Fast API with threading, or is it better to do the whole thing with async? So my feeling is that async typically is a really great fit for APIs. And that's because it really covers the cases that you're going to commonly encounter. So often you're going to need to interact with, say, a database or other APIs, and you want to make sure that you do those things concurrently so that it takes less time. And async is really, in my opinion, the best solution for that. Threads, you can also do it with threads, but I'd say that's not the typical use case for your API unless you're really setting up like an API that does very computationally intensive tasks, and you need to use threads to like split those tasks over different cores. But even then, you have a problem with the Python global interpreter lock, so you might have to use processes instead. I'd say start with async. If that covers everything you need, that's definitely going to be simpler than threads. All right, so Rajarski says, can you kindly suggest some good path on properly understanding and using asynchrony concurrent programming in Python? Well, I did a video about it where I introduced asynchronous programming in quite some detail. Also show you some examples of how to use async and await and what that actually means. So you could start there. I also have a course, Next Level Python, where I dive more into details on concurrent programming as well, with a couple of examples, so you might find that helpful as well. But you can get started with just a free video on my channel, and yeah, there's tons of people talking about it, but I also did a video about it. Eric, how to organize app to run the same process with different data structures from clients. The process should be configurable via a UI, and the process runs in an add-in in authoring software. I hope I'm interpreting this correctly, but if I am, is the idea that the app retrieves data, which has, depending on each client, a different structure, different fields, and you need to work with that in a particular process. If that is how I understand, then the typical way to solve it would be to introduce a layer in between, let's say a compatibility layer that translates these different data structures into a sort of standardized format. And then your process that relies on it only knows about the standardized format. That's how I would typically do it. And for configurable processes, so then you start with that standardized format, so you work like in a little bubble. And there are some frameworks that can actually help you set up these and manage these kind of processes. I recently looked at TyPy, which actually does that. So that's like an orchestration engine for pipelines, and you can control it. As a user, you can control it. It also exposes the REST API to control those processes. So that might be something to look into. Let's see, Dave. If you were a junior developer, what would be your path to grow in software engineering using Python? So if I was a junior developer, I'm assuming that I would know how to code already. So I would know the basics of object-oriented programming. My path to grow, I mean, on the one hand, the most important thing is obviously to get practice. Right? I feel like coding is really something that you just have to do a lot of to get better at. So I would start with working on a specific project that would interest me that involves Python. And that serves as like a starting ground of, learning new things. And then trying to be explicit about the things where you have blind spots. Like, I actually did that a while ago because, well, I learned Python a long time ago, and actually doing videos on the ArjanCodes YouTube channel actually helped me learn a lot better how to code in Python. So I actually learned a lot myself about it. But I also noticed that I didn't know a lot about data analysis and AI and things like that. So to solve that, or to address that, I tried to lean into those shortcomings that I knew that I had, and I tried to find projects that involved me having to do something with AI tools or with data analysis. And that has been, for me, a really great way to learn new things more quickly. So be always aware, even whether it doesn't matter whether you're a junior, medium, senior developer, always try to be aware of where your blind spots are, and seek out projects that actually are in those blind spots, and get out of your comfort zone, basically. Robert, opinion on Mojo. Yeah, so I talked about it in the beginning. I haven't used it yet, but I will take a closer look at it. And I will probably do a video about it on the channel, because I hear a lot of people talking about it. How to properly do a good code review. Do you have a checklist of things to look for, or do you just read code and go from there? So there's a couple of things that are, I feel, very important for a good code review. One is a question of scope. So you want to avoid that you need to review like thousands of lines of code in one go, because that's just way too much. You will not be able to go into the required level of detail. So a very important thing is, if you want to do a good code review, you have to make sure that the code that you're reviewing actually has proper scope, is not too large, so that you actually, so that it doesn't become some sort of unsurmountable project. The other thing that I find really important in doing a good code review is to not only look at like one area of the code. So what I mean by that is not that you're not just focusing on details like variable names and I don't know, this if statement could be rewritten a bit, because that's very like detailed, very low level. But it's also good to take a look at the higher level, like how are components connected, what do these interfaces look like. If you look at what the code is intended to do and what you expect the code to do in the future, are there ways that you could improve the design so that it will better fit that possible future? Things like that. And another thing that I find really important in a code review is to, especially if you're a more senior developer, giving a review to a junior developer, which is often the way that it works, is that you make sure you don't make it about you being a really smart guy, basically, or girl. Because it's not. It's about trying to make the code better. So it's not about your ego trying to show how smart you are and that you can find all of these mistakes. It's about helping each other. And so always approach doing a code review from this position, a position of being helpful. And that means giving constructive feedback, giving feedback that also is going to provide an actual solution that the person can actually do something with. Don't make things personal, things like that. Daniel, hi ArjanLive content. Thank you. You're most welcome. Glad to hear. JFL, do you use a dependency injection lib for real projects, or do you instantiate dependencies and pass them the users manually? If yes, what lib do you recommend? If not, what's your approach? So I don't explicitly use a dependency injection library in my real-world projects, but several of my projects use FastAPI. And FastAPI has a dependency injection framework built in. So that's what I will use. And it works quite well, because that allows me, for example, to provide the database as a dependency to my endpoints in FastAPI. So that's how I use it quite a bit, actually. Other than that, I tend to keep things simple and not use dependency injection libraries, but simply write the code in such a way that objects are being created in another place than where they're being used. Hanfang, would it be possible to cover a video in the future to introduce more how to manage and check performance, unnecessary waste of resources. Yeah, so I haven't talked a lot about performance at all in my videos. It's also for a reason that, well, Python is not really aimed at optimizing performance, right? It's a scripting language. So I think if you really want like blazingly fast code, then you probably shouldn't write that in Python at all. Even though Python is getting faster every new release. I think the latest one, they got like 30-40% speed improvement. So that's quite substantial. The way I would approach a video about performance is maybe more from the point of view of design, because I talk a lot about design on my channel, obviously. And performance is not just about tweaking algorithms to make sure that things are very fast, but it can also be about design and how efficiently your code is set up so that you're not passing too much information, that you're not creating objects everywhere, that you remove duplication. If you remove duplication, it means you have more opportunities to optimize the code that was duplicated before, you know, things like that. So I might do a video about that topic. Davis, using Flask backend, Streamlit frontend, and FireDB with, oh, now I lost my, with PostgreSQL. I'm using AI to do comments, documentation, unit testing, regular expressions, if needed, error handling, refactoring. Your thoughts? Yeah, I use AI a lot also nowadays. Mostly I use GitHub Copilot in VS Code. It helps me do a lot of these things, like exactly the things that you're saying, comments, documentation, unit test, everything. I use it for all of those things. Regular expressions, I haven't practically used them for a while, actually, in my projects. The only thing you need to be aware of is that AI can make mistakes, just like humans, so you do have to check things. But it's an incredible time saver for me. Second tool that I use quite a lot is ChatGPT. And I've actually been trying out the new GitHub Copilot chat, which is sort of like ChatGPT in VS Code. And that actually works also really well and has some really cool features. I actually just recorded a video about that last week, so I'm going to publish that in a couple of weeks. But that's actually really nice. And as soon as that's out of beta, I will probably switch from ChatGPT to using Copilot chat in all my projects. Let's see. Jerome, how do you convince your colleague to make cleaner code when there is no bugs? My blood boils when I see their 500 lines functions. Yeah, I think it's a problem that is kind of hard to address, and you have to, I think more about not approaching it from the point of view of criticizing somebody, but really nudging somebody in like a slightly better direction than that they're going in. So I also wouldn't impose rules like your functions can only be like 5 lines long or things like that. That also doesn't work. But I think it's really a question of continuing to show the person that, hey, here is like a slightly less or a slightly more structured version of what you did. And if you do it that way, you can actually reuse these things over there, which saves you a lot of time. So it's not about writing bug-free code, which is great. Everybody wants to write bug-free code. But it's about showing that things are actually way simpler if you split up things, and it takes less time if you do that instead of writing these 500 plus lines of in a single function. Let's see. Oglob. Oh wait, I'm skipping something. Daniel, is the best practice to handle front end and back end at the same place? Like, for example, having a single project with both Fast API and Dash. I've been using that for a couple of projects now, and it actually works quite well. Like I'm currently working on a new thing. I can't disclose yet what it is, but it's really cool. I think you're going to like it, but it involves both a front end and the back end part, and it's in the same repository. And this is actually quite helpful if it's in the same repository. If you want to at some point release something like that as an open source tool, it's easy. That is just one repository. And a second advantage of turning that front-end plus back-end into a single project is that you can benefit from possibilities of frameworks like Next.js, which actually, wait a minute. I think that's again yeah, there we go. I'm just switching this with my camera. It's heating up from time to time. And it's a very nice and warm 20 plus degrees here in the Netherlands, so that goes a bit faster. Anyway, where was I? Yeah, so front end and back end together. So if you have a tool like Next.js, then actually it's really helpful in that it allows you to do both of these things at the same time. So then you actually have a lot of benefit from combining it in a single project. And also, I've stopped like using complicated things like microservices and things like that. I feel like in many cases, a monolith is actually a pretty nice way to do it. It really simplifies things. So I don't really see a big issue there. Ross, thank you for your support. So I plan to do an online course using Python. Will somebody be able to use the code after 10 years, or will I have to rewrite all of it? Old code becomes useless, and what can we do? Yeah, I mean, that's a problem with any type of content you produce. Like, for me, it's sort of the same. So, I mean, I have my weekly videos on YouTube, and you know, some of the videos are getting dated already, and that's like within 2.5 years. So it's unfortunately part of the domain that we're in. There's just a lot of things that are changing. They're changing all the time, and we have no choice but to adapt to it. So the way I view it for my own online courses is that I don't see it as something that I built and then I just put it out there and wait 10 years and not update anything. It's like anything nowadays. You have to keep things updated, and you learn new things, and that means you adapt and you improve things based on what you learn. So a course shouldn't be a static thing. It should adapt to what is happening in the industry so that it stays relevant. So and that also, I think, shows the problem with, you know, some of these people saying like, oh, if you just launch an online course and then it's passive income, you don't have to do anything anymore. It's simply not true. Launching and maintaining an online course is a lot of work. I've been doing it now for almost 2 years. And I'm like continuously tweaking things, adding new things, changing things, and it's a lot of work. But I think that's the only reasonable thing that actually works in the long term. Right. So, Oglob, did you consider focusing on another language in the future? I found Rust APIs extremely unintuitive compared to Python. Hi from Python. Oh, nice, you were there as well. Yeah, so I'm definitely always open to exploring new languages. I don't really see myself as being completely tied to Python, to be honest. I think Python is a great language. I also don't think it's going anywhere, even with newer things like Rust appearing or Mojo, you know. I think Python is still a great language, and it's exactly the ease of use of Python that makes it so nice. There's of course a huge ecosystem of lots of libraries that are available. So I think Python is not going anywhere, but I might at some point shift the focus of my channel a bit and do content about other programming languages as well. Let me try to switch on my camera again. Yeah, there we are. Slightly better image. All right. K98 Killer. Any advice for writing P2P apps with Python? Not specifically. No, I haven't really built those myself. Fighter. When does making a Python application become a problem due to Python's slower speed compared to C? Well, obviously it's going to be a problem when you need something that's very performant. And if that's the key thing that you need to achieve, then well, you have to really think about whether Python is the right choice for you. It doesn't, I mean, Python has become faster. It's not excruciatingly slow. It can still do quite a lot of things. And I personally very rarely actually need more performance. And if I do, then often I'm already using things like NumPy, which has C bindings under the hood, so then it's still quite fast. So I don't really notice an issue actually. So yeah, if you need performance, then that's like the main thing to think about. If it's like that, then Python is not really maybe the best choice for you. John, can you share your opinion on coding dojos and maybe share examples on how to design good ones? Yeah, I haven't designed those myself. Actually, I can't really say anything specific about that, to be honest. Let's go back up a bit. Caverna asks, off top, your sound capture is great. Do you mind saying what the mic is that you use? Yeah, I use a Sennheiser MKH50. It's an expensive microphone, but I find that it's like a one-time investment, especially with microphones that I can basically keep using for many, many, many years. And, you know, it's a really great quality. I love the microphone. So that's what I'm using. But maybe that's also because I have also a background in music recording, you know, more as a hobby project. So I've always been very active with trying to get good sound. And I also like doing that for dialogue. The Economists, what is the best way to output logs in a project? I'm in a project that uses log4j linked to Spark, but I'm not sure where to instantiate the log class to all existing classes in the project. Yeah, this is a typical problem that you have with logging. Like, where do you create the logger? How do you get access to the logger everywhere in your code? The problem is, of course, that you want to avoid that if you're using, let's say, dependency injection, that you have to provide to every function the logger as an argument, because that's just going to be a huge pain, right? So that's like one extreme version of dealing with it. Like the other extreme end is that you don't provide it anywhere as an argument, but you simply import the log everywhere, and then you just have access from it from the global scope, basically. And that's also not ideal, because that means that anytime you want to reuse that code, well, it relies on some globally defined log object that you then have to supply. So that's also not great. So the truth is somewhere in the middle, I find. So I typically try to work out something where up until a certain level, I do supply the logger object. So I do create the logger object in one place. So I'm sure it's there. And then wherever it makes sense, and it doesn't add too much complication, I add it as a dependency injection, basically using an extra argument to a function. But then in some, let's say, lower level areas of the code, I might actually just use an import because that's simpler. It depends a bit. I try to find a reasonable balance because, well, unfortunately, there's no perfect solution. Segwayed, have you tried learning something new and found that no tutorial or guide ends up with a working example? If so, how do you work around learning something if the tutorial steps have failures? So it happens quite regularly that I'm trying to do something and that there is no tutorial that can actually help me. So I have to sort of figure it out myself. I find especially that happens with, like, I don't know, course issues in the backend and things like that, which is like some sort of next level of hell, in my opinion. I try to always remember that when you are coding, that a computer is in principle a deterministic machine, right? So if there is an error somewhere, that's because something's wrong, and that happens somewhere in the process, and you can normally pinpoint in which area of the code that's going to happen. So then it's a question of being very precise, zooming in and eliminating one by one the things that can't be the problem. And sometimes this is very frustrating because it takes a lot of time, but, well, that's then the only thing that you can do, basically. Then you spend the day trying to figure out what the problem is, and then you find out it's something really stupid, like you forgot to set a default value or something. In the end, it's always something really stupid, and that's also very frustrating. So try to be structured, try to remember that it's deterministic. There's always a reason for the problem. And if you look long enough and hard enough and you're structured in the way that you look at the problems, you're going to find the solution. Adam, I'm a fresh software developer. I'm getting in the idea of imposter syndrome. Don't have confidence on my skill, even if I write code very well. But the environment that I'm working on is awful. Yeah, so often, you know, it's not just about you, right? Especially if you like join a company and you have to work in an existing code base. I mean, it's very well possible that that existing code base is actually complete crap, and then you have to work around problems, and that's something that's not on you, that's on the company that you're joining. So in the end, if you're learning, you're basically always only competing with yourself because you're trying to become a better version of yourself, and that should be the way that you measure your progress. And don't look at where other people are because that's useless. Look at where you are and look at how you can improve a few % at a time what you're doing. I got a graduate software engineer job. Yay! Well done. Nice. Sharam, would you prefer writing backends in Python as well as writing APIs using FastAPI, or using Golang, or as Golang scales better? So for the time being, I have the most experience with FastAPI myself. That works really well. I haven't encountered any big scaling issues. Also, if you deploy to the cloud and you need like more instances of your server, if there's too many requests per second, you can actually launch a second instance, and then that's the way that you solve your scaling problem. So I don't really see that's an issue if you're using something like FastAPI. Jerome asks, have you seen or tried Condon? No, I haven't. Condon, at my job, I'm working on a really old Flask app. There's barely any tests, but refactoring is necessary. We keep adding things and fixing bugs. How can I address this situation to improve the code? Yeah, that's, I think, a common problem. Lots of companies are struggling with legacy code bases that they have to maintain. Sometimes or often actually the developer working on the code actually left the company, so then nobody knows anymore how everything's working. I remember seeing this talk a couple of years ago by somebody from Booking.com, you know, the hotel room booking service, and they had like a really old script that was responsible for checking room availabilities, and nobody actually dared touch it because it was like really complex, but the whole system was kind of built around it. So that's, I guess, something that happens in lots of companies, especially companies that have been around for a while. There's not really a silver bullet solution for that. I'd say you'd have to take it really step by step and look at the area of the code that is going to have, let's say, the most impact if you refactor that and clean that up, and then start there, and then, you know, do the most important thing first that has the most impact, and then step by step try to get rid of the old code and slowly, step by step, replace it by better, well-tested code. So it's a question of deciding which part do you start with. You can do it all at once. You have to do it step by step and then prioritize. Alex, where are you from? I'm from the Netherlands. Yes, I'm Dutch, 100% Dutch. Miran, Fast API or Golang or Node, what would you prefer or why? So I've mostly worked with Fast API and Node. Of course, what would you prefer? Well, if you look at backends, I like Fast API because it's really simple to set up. Very little boilerplate code. There's a good ecosystem of other libraries that patch well into Fast API, like SQL Alchemy, for example. So I think Fast API is really, really great. Node has more boilerplates. It's a lot more work to set it up. You're going to have your Node modules that quickly become a huge mess. But Node works very well with TypeScript, which is another language that I love a lot. And if you're building a front-end application as well as a back-end application, then it does have an advantage if the programming language that you're using for both is the same, because then your team can work in a single language, and that's typically easier than if you have to deal with two different languages. So I'd say Node works pretty well if you're building both a front end and a back end, especially if you're using Next.js that actually already incorporates a combined front end and back end setup. So you only deploy one service that does both of those things, and that works really well. I use Love from India. Thank you so much. Xi Jinping, is it easier to build reliable software with Python without too many unit tests versus a static language like Golang? Yeah, so I'd say it's really easy to build reliable software with Python, but it's really crucial that you rely on adding type annotations. And type annotations are going to be of tremendous help in making sure that you're writing the components in a way that they accept the right data. So for me, that's a really important part of making sure that you're writing reliable software. And on top of that, type annotations actually save you a ton of time. So that would be my most important advice, actually. Christian, would you say getting certification in Python is good? I think certificates help on a certain level because they provide a sort of external proof that you're good at what you do. In that sense, getting a certificate is useful. You don't have to do a full computer science study, to be honest. Most companies don't ask for that only, especially if you can show that you have experience, then the studies that you did become less important. And that means it also, in a certain way, holds true for certificates, because if you can show like your work on GitHub and you show that you write really high quality code, you have a lot of experience with previous companies, etc., then your degree or the certificates you have gotten are a lot less important. Nas, why Python and not Java? I've coded for like many years in Java, actually, especially in the 90s. For me, it worked well in a sense that it really taught me a lot about object-oriented programming. I mean, the original Design Patterns book also uses, I think, Java examples. But I had to write some Java code like 1 or 2 years ago, something like that, and it felt like a real pain to me, like very verbose, very restrictive. I much prefer the flexibility of a language like Python or TypeScript, for that matter. I think these languages are more modern. They leave more flexibility to the developer, and I think overall that just works better. And also, I mean, Java is immediately complicated, I feel, with Gradle, and it's getting everything set up is I found it pretty cumbersome and slow, so it's really not my preferred way of working. Graham, I watched your data classes YouTube video a year ago. Since then, your vids and course have helped me so much from ground up. Data engineer now, can't thank you enough. Lovely. I'm so happy that it's been helpful to you. Sefti Mali, do you recommend reading a clean code book even if the examples are in Java? Yes, absolutely. It's still a good book, and it's not about the programming language. It's really about the concepts and the ideas that are behind it, and they don't just apply to Java, they also apply to Python. So I think it's still a good book to read. Let's see. Dank, merci. What does a software developer do? Drink a lot of coffee, play table tennis, setting up terminal plugins, things like that, and sometimes develop a bit of software. Thomas asks, what's your opinion on specific departments for IT stuff like data team, etc., versus distributing experts in multiple areas like data engineer in a sales team, etc.? So I've mostly worked myself in either a startup, so that had a pretty small team, so then basically things were already quite mixed up, or at a university where things were like extremely rigid, and I definitely prefer the smaller multidisciplinary team approach, to be honest. I'm gonna try to switch on my camera again. This is getting fun. So you can watch my ear. There we go. Okay, good. Yeah, we're back. I've been reading quite a few books, like business-focused books, actually, and one of them I really liked, and that's called Oversubscribed by Daniel Priestley. And this is a really nice book because it's a business book. It's not about software development, but it does talk about what works well is that you have like smaller entrepreneurial teams, is what he calls it. So it's really multidisciplinary teams that are together to perform a certain job. And I also like that for software development, because often, you know, you're working on a specific project, you need different kinds of inputs. If you have a multidisciplinary team, it's also easier to assign roles and make sure that there's less conflicts. You know, if you're the only backend developer in a team, well then, you know, you're going to be the one who develops the backend. You don't have to fight and distribute the work. So, and it's also more dynamic because you can like shape and reshape these teams based on what you actually need. And nowadays that's quite important. Whereas if you have like departments that are very rigid, then you need to do lots of meetings so that everybody is aligned. And I think to me, it's not the ideal way of doing it. Yefen, do you have any decent experience with splitting monolith to microservices? I did that up until a certain level and not using 20, 30 different microservices, but I did split up a monolith that was combining a RESTful API, payment processing and authentication, and we tried splitting that up into smaller services. I found it like really a pain in the neck to do it, and also splitting things up well in microservices is really hard because you have to really think carefully about how those things communicate. And if microservices communicate too much, then you're going to end up with like a ton of dependencies, and that means that the whole idea of microservices as being like this sort of independent things that you can just deploy while you leave the rest alone, that just won't work anymore. So be very careful. And if you can stay on the monolith, the longer you can do that, honestly, the better off you're going to be honest. At least that's my own experience. Nagrat, hi Arjan, do you think there are enough freelancing opportunity in Europe for C++, Python, Docker, Kubernetes that I can aim for? Quite new in the industry. Yeah, I mean, there's for sure quite a few software development jobs. I mean, we all know that the tech industry is sort of in a little dip at the moment. You know, lots of people have been laid off, also from the larger tech companies, obviously. So I'd say the economy is a bit different. But there are also a lot of new things on the horizon, and I'm quite convinced that this is a temporary issue. So it might at the moment be a bit hard to find opportunities. On the other hand, it might also mean that freelancing is actually easier because companies are going to be looking for more flexible arrangements. So they might want to hire a freelancer just to do some work for them versus hiring a full staff member. So, and I would not just focus on Europe because especially development, you know, you can do that remotely. So there's like the tons of different places where you can work with people on the other side of the world, and you don't have to focus on Europe alone. So also look in the US, for example. Amok, can you write a framework for algo trading, something which includes backtesting, fetching data from multiple exchanges? Actually, I built like a long time ago, like years already, a trading bot, and I was using a library called CCXT. It's for cryptocurrency specifically. So I'm not sure if you're looking for that or for like other trading other things. But CCXT is a library that has both a Python and a JavaScript version. I'm not sure it still exists. You can check it out. But they connect with lots of different exchanges. So I would start there. So I'm not going to write that because I'm also no longer into algorithmic trading. Mainly because I don't believe that's really going to bring a lot of value if I spend my time doing that. I prefer to spend more time on making better videos and helping you guys. Let's see. Hector, I had a recursion issue after using slots in a data class. What are the drawbacks from using slots other than speed? Well, the disadvantage of slots is that you're fixing things because, and I mean fixing things in that you're limiting yourself to not changing the instance variables that are part of an object, right? It's no longer dynamic. You're using slots, and that means that Python can optimize things. So that's a drawback. It's also possible that not all libraries that rely on objects take into account that you might use the slots feature. So especially if those libraries interact with other objects on a lower level, like calling Donder methods and things like that. So that might actually not work all that well. So slots are great. They really speed up your code, but you also have to be aware that it's not a feature that all libraries are going to be compatible with. Even though I personally never encountered problems with it, to be honest. So it sounds, I'd be interested to learn more about the recursion issue that you had with data classes. Piero, hello from Peru. Love your videos. Thank you so much, Piero. Good to hear. Pierre, Constantino, any guidance, perhaps even a video on how to handle authorization in your app? There are lots of tutorials on authentication, but many stop there and don't go into access control to different areas. Yeah, it's actually a topic that is on my list already since quite a while. I never really seem to be getting to that topic since there's just so many other things that are also piling up. The way that that I've built authorization typically is using a pretty classic way of having roles and permissions. So users in your system have roles and roles have permissions. And then in your app, you check if a user has a certain permission, and that means that you can then flexibly design roles so that they fit the application that you need. It's a bit generic. I should probably do a video about it. Dank, I've recently graduated with a computer science degree. I still don't understand what a software development engineer makes. The only thing I can understand how games are made, and that's shallow too. Yeah, so I mean, there's all kinds of different software engineer jobs that can go from building a game, like if you're in the game industry. It can be with embedded systems, so maybe you're writing software for I don't know, face detection in security cameras. It can be for web applications, like you're building an accounting software as a service platform. It can be desktop applications that you're working on a photo editing app. So there's like so many different possibilities if you're a software engineer, and they all require like different skills, different languages, different frameworks, different approaches. So there's a lot of variety. So if you just have experience with games, that's like a tiny slice of what you could potentially do as a software developer. But of course there are some things that overlap, like the whole ideas of, you know, thinking about design principles, design patterns, the things that I talk about on my channel. They apply to basically all of those fields. Raven, what are you considering exploring in the future? New language or shift towards DevOps or data or service or applications? I've been doing a bit more on like topics about DevOps. I've did a video about Docker already a while ago. I'd like to cover more topics about software architecture because I get lots of requests from you on that specific topic. So I want to do more about software architecture. I've also been doing some more AI focused videos, and I want to do a bit more about using AI APIs and how to integrate that into existing backends, and how you can leverage AI to make your tools better, basically. So that's another thing that I'm very interested in. And finally, I'm also quite interested in software testing, so I might do a bit more content about testing as well, but that's, I think, will be only later in the year. Let's see. So Aditya, what are your thoughts on books like Clean Code? I've seen your videos, but want to reiterate, as I saw some Reddit threads saying Clean Code is good to know, but it's not practical in modern code. So there's some some things to consider. Like, one is that, well, a book like Clean Code is using Java. So if you mainly work in Python, well, you have to kind of remap the ideas to how you would write it in Python. It's also quite focused on object-oriented programming, which we don't have to do. And if you're using Python, right, you can also use functions. So it's more about having an idea of what the concepts are and what the way of thinking is to write clean code. I think that's the most important thing, actually. And So I'd say that having that way of structured thinking, trying to keep things simple, I think it's still valuable also in modern code. But of course we'd also have better tools, right? Like one of the arguments for writing clean code is that it's easier to refactor. But as our tools get better at refactoring, and as AI tools are helping us more and more to do refactoring faster, well, you could wonder whether it's really still helpful to write clean code. I think the main advantage of writing clean code is that as a software developer, it forces you to really think about the design of your code, and that helps you write better code overall. So that's, to me, it goes beyond simple refactoring, basically. All right, let's see. Ben, hello from Utrecht. Thanks for the video on writing unit test. Helped me earlier today. Bah, good to hear. And good to hear you're close by. K98Kill, have you developed any mobile cross-platform GUIs with Python? What do you think of Beware and Kiva? I haven't. No. I have developed some. Like I wrote a book like 10 years ago already about game development in Swift, and I built like a simple iPad game on Swift, which was fun, but I haven't really done any other like mobile game development. Davis, to me, writing code is like solving puzzles, and with AI, I think it makes solving puzzles faster. Yep. I have a math function that could allow for 3D assigned indexing. Would this be helpful? I'm not really sure how that would be helpful. Okay, you're gonna have to explain that to me, what you mean. Mohamed, do you think that MVC architecture is the best fit for Telegram, chatbot, or chatbots in general? Well, some sort of architecture that takes into account GUI is definitely helpful, and that doesn't have to be MVC. I find I tend to go for a model view presenter. To me, it feels a bit more logical, honestly. So that's where I typically start, model view presenter, and that would work totally fine for a chatbot. Yeah. At least it's better to do it than just put everything into a huge class and hope for the best. If you make some effort to use an architecture like MVC or MVP, that's already a lot of help. Omar, for someone who doesn't know anything about programming and wants to learn the basics like algorithms and data structures, can you recommend resources for that? So personally, I focus like my content on, let's say, more intermediate, advanced developers. That's not because I don't think beginners are nice people or something. I mean, everybody's been a beginner, right? But as a content creator, you also have to focus on what you feel comfortable with. And that's an area that, well, I like to make mostly content for. There's a ton of beginner resources for Python. I would really recommend taking a look at Real Python. That's a website that has like tons of tutorials, explains everything you need to know. I think they also have a ton of courses. You can find courses on Udemy. There's really a lot that's out there. But Real Python is very nice. I learned a lot from Real Python myself. Let's see. We have Eric, a core package with models and other core modules for common code base and plugin architecture to convert the data is an acceptable starting point. Well, yeah, it depends on what you want to build, of course. When I really start with something new, like building something from scratch, I don't really yet think in terms of modules and separating things too much. I really start with trying to get something working, and then I realize, oh wait, actually if I took that part, that's kind of a generic part, maybe I should move that to a separate file. And then when you're organizing things, then you realize, oh hey, wait a minute, I can actually make that really generic and then turn it into a separate package. And then that's how I sort of progress from where I start. BTKB, when is your software architecture course released? I could really use it right now. Yeah, it's still in the works. The reason that's taken me some time is because I'm going to do something very special. I can't say anything else about it yet, but it's going to be something different. Connor, hey Arjan, what are your thoughts about this book, Architecture Patterns with Python Enabling Test-Driven Development, etc.? I haven't read that book, so I don't have thoughts about it yet. I do want to spend some time in the coming months when things have settled down here a bit to spend more time on reading and perhaps also doing a video where I talk about some of these books in more detail to give you a bit more my view on them. Let's see. Roger, hi Arjan, what are your thoughts on team members that are reluctant to upgrade their Python version and still use Python 3.7, even Python 2.x? Well, kick them in the nuts, obviously, because Python 2.x, at least that's a complete corpse. Nobody should use that anymore. There's lots of problems with using very old versions of Python in terms of security. So you really need to use newer version to make sure you get like the latest security improvements and things like that. So staying on an older version doesn't make any sense whatsoever. 3.7 is also still I think there's like so many new features in the new versions of Python. There's like tons of speed ups that I don't think it makes any sense whatsoever to stick with a really old Python version. So I don't see any reason to be reluctant about that. Phineas, Arjan, can you do video tutorials here on AWS? I might do that. I did one about Docker, and I didn't do really about cloud technology specifically, so that might be a possibility in the future. Aaron, curious, when you are going for a more senior software engineering interview, asked to discuss the technical aspects of the things you have built, what are the specifics you discuss? So I think as a senior developer, if you want to get if you're doing an interview, it's different from a junior engineer. I think an important aspect of being senior developer is that you have a bird's eye view, that you have an understanding of how, let's say, a complex patchwork of systems work together. So I wouldn't find it very valuable if I were interviewing somebody I would hire for a senior developer position to talk about, I don't know, how to sort data in a binary tree or something. Because that's not something you would build from scratch anyway, and B, it's not what I would be hiring a senior developer for. I would really want to talk way more about design and making sure that it's somebody that is open to change and using new technology, and that can quickly come up with something that doesn't have to be perfect, but that at least in terms of the idea is going to work. So that would be my main focus for interviews. XOP, hey Arjan, you're a big inspiration. Oh, thank you so much. What are the negatives of Fast API? So one of the negatives could be that it's a relatively new framework. I mean, it's not like a Flask that has been around like a very, very long time. Sorry, you're watching my ear again. So if you're working a lot with legacy code, then it means that you might actually not be able to use it. So that's one of the disadvantages. Otherwise, I'd say it's much simpler than a lot of the existing frameworks. So it's definitely something to keep looking into. Did you write? Have you ever used a database called Progress Open Edge? Just curious, I'm stuck with it. No, I haven't used that. I'm sorry. No. Emmanuel, hey Arjan, would you like to do pair programming session with test-driven development? I've done a bit of pair programming, but I don't have that much experience with it. I mean, I've done it sort of automatically when I work with my software developer at my company. I do have very busy schedule at the moment, so I don't really have time to do like one-on-one pair programming sessions, unfortunately. STP, sometimes feel like quitting when I see failures in my code. I even feel like quitting everything in life. Any advice? Don't quit. It's way too much fun. And it's like, if you see failures, if you see errors, that actually means you're making progress. Because if you don't make mistakes, if you don't see any errors, you're not making any progress. Errors are like the most crucial thing that you need for learning. So personally, I look actively for errors and failures because it helps me understand things better. It helps me become better at writing software. So embrace the errors, embrace failures. And if you really feel like quitting, honestly, absolutely get some help, because there's no reason. There's no reason to do that. Werner, hey Arjan, I want to ask you what advice you have for me, because after 1 year of studies in Python, still struggling, and getting a job has not gone so well. So I think the most important thing is getting a lot of practice with Python. So it's not just doing studies, it's really about developing yourself. And maybe you can think about a particular niche that you are excited about. Maybe you are excited about AI tools. Maybe you are excited about working with a Raspberry Pi. Or perhaps you're excited about building a web application. And think of something that triggers you, that you find interesting. It could also be a domain, like if you're a musician, maybe you could build like a music tool, or perhaps you have another hobby where you could imagine building some sort of tool to help you. And by doing that, you combine like your, and let's say your passion with learning new things about coding and about Python. And that's a good way to get started. It's also a project that you can publish that's going to help you get more credibility when you try to land a job. So that would be my suggestion. Did you write? Also, have you lost weight? I find in programming that's typically one of the harder things to do when you're working 12 hours per day. Yeah, it's. I did lose some weight actually. I've been trying to get healthier over the past months. Actually, what happened is that I got kids at some point. Like, my oldest daughter is now 8 years old, so it's already quite a while ago. But when you have kids, especially if you have young children, it's very easy to develop, bad eating habits, and you're very tired. You don't sleep. You've broken nights. It's very stressful. You have lots of extra things that are suddenly coming towards you, and I just noticed I started living, less healthy. I started feeling less good, and it just keeps creeping up. It's not something that happens like from one day to the next. So, and at some point I was just so fed up with it, and then I thought, okay, you know what? I'm going to get some help with this. And so I've been now going to a gym again, feeling, and that's also helped me lose some weight, and really makes me feel a lot better. I sleep better. I have more energy. So for me, it's really something that's now become very important to me to continue doing. And actually it helps me focus more, so I don't notice any loss in efficiency. I actually notice that I'm becoming more efficient because I just feel better. So it's not something you should skimp on. I've learned the hard way. Let's see. Rama, how do you identify topics for your channel? Actually, most of the time, I try to do videos about topics that people ask me to do. So I have a Discord server. If you want to join that, just go to discord.arjan.codes. It's free. There's like a lovely community there. But I also have there a section where you can suggest topics for videos. So I collect those actually. And also sometimes people on YouTube, they post comments below a video of, hey, can you do a video about this topic? So I truly listen to those things and I try to do videos about topics that people are wondering about. Of course, you always have to think about the topic and whether it's actually suitable for a video. Sometimes that's a bit hard to do, but in some cases, if it works, then that's how I get my topics. And I get suggestions almost every day, so that means I almost never have to worry about getting inspired to think of topics for videos. That's really easy to me. Now, of course, I still also sometimes have ideas myself, so I try to do a combination of what I think my audience wants, and things that I'm myself excited about, and I try to find a good balance. Let's see. Jeroen, between you and me, don't you wish Python would use curly brackets? For years, I thought that would be nice, but I've come to appreciate the brevity of not having to use curly brackets. And how you call them? Point commas, semicolons. Sorry, had a brain fog there. I feel I'm not quite used to not using them, and that works quite well. Actually, I went back like a couple of weeks ago to some TypeScript code, so I had to write again some TypeScript code, and I was forgetting my curly braces and semicolons all over the place, and it was like a big mess. And I don't know if you've been a really early subscriber. In my very early videos, you sometimes see me making the mistake where I accidentally write curly brace in a piece of Python code. So that's actually really funny to watch back. Okay. So Sita asks, hi Arjan, do you think Python as main language for backend is a good choice if our main app is AI based? Well, it depends if you're using an AI service like the OpenAI API, for example. That works perfectly fine in Python. And actually, there's a really cool new library that I've been looking into that I'm really excited about, which is LangChain, that allows you to have a sort of standard way of interacting with AI services, which is really nice. I'm going to do a video about that soon. So Python is a great choice. And then on top of that, if you use Python, then you also have access to the whole ecosystem of scikit-learn and all the other data analysis tools and libraries that we have in Python. So I think it's a great option. Emmanuel, what's your view on XP practices? I never really followed like a specific school of software development processes like XP or Scrum, or since I've mostly worked in like really small teams, so we kind of cobbled together our own version of development processes. Actually, it's something I want to talk about at some point also in the video, so I don't have really a clear view on these practices. TA, are you being powered and run by ChatGPT? More and more. The live stream is actually real, but it's definitely a useful tool to me. I'm not going to ignore that. ChatGPT helps me, like normally if I prepare a video, I don't let ChatGPT write the entire script of the video. That doesn't make any sense to me because, I want it to be my personal thing. But it does help me get clarity sometimes on some issues that I'm thinking about. helps me not forget things. So it helps me create better content, and that's what I use it for. Let's see. Stuff, you also have a JavaScript learning YouTube channel. No, I have only one channel because that's already a lot of work. Johan, how much salary is reasonable for a programmer? Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. It depends very much on the country where you're based. I mean, salaries in EU are different from salaries in the US, which are different from salaries in Asia. Salaries for freelancers are different from salaries for staff members. Junior versus media versus senior engineers is different. So there's not really one clear number that I can tell you. But I would look online. There are sites like Glassdoor, for example, that can give you a rough recommendation. And I feel these are typically quite precise on the type of range of salary you can expect for a certain type of job. So that's where I would look. Let's see, what else do we have? Emmanuel, have you done some test-driven development pair programming? What do you think about this? Yeah, so test-driven development I've done. Also, the developer that's part of my company, actually that's part of ArjanCodes now, is using test-driven development, so that works quite well. It forces you to always, when you write code, think about how you're going to test it. And I think that brings a lot of value, actually, because that means that you automatically start applying design principles more judiciously, and that just leads to better quality code. So I like it. Rubis, recently I found my first job. Congrats, but they tell me to do random things. So currently I'm back-end, front-end, some DevOps stuff, and even privacy policy writing. Should I see this as progress? It's good if things converge at some point, but it's also a good opportunity to learn about all of these different things. I think definitely doing back-end, front-end, and DevOps is a great opportunity to learn. Even privacy policy writing could be useful because it's good if you're aware of how data is being used as a developer and how you can write code so that you're always mindful of the data that you're asking and the data that you actually need to do the job. So to me, it sounds like not a big problem. Now, if your job is changing every other week and it keeps staying like that, then maybe you need to talk with your manager about giving you a bit more stability so you could actually also go a bit deeper and not just broader. It should be both, right? Let's see, Viran, have you any opinions on Golang? Do you write Golang? I haven't really used Golang at all, actually. So I can't really give a clear opinion about it now. Somdota, how do I Dockerize a React app? I want to use WebSocket to connect the React app to my backend written in Python. This doesn't work on Docker because React apps are hard-coded to bind to localhost. Okay, so that's a very specific questions. With Docker, as far as I know, is you need to open the ports that you're going to communicate on. That could be many reasons why it can be an issue, but WebSockets and Docker should work because I think there's a ton of services that are being deployed and they all use Docker. So I don't think that should be an issue. And then on the React app side, yeah, I'm not really sure. I haven't used the WebSockets a lot, so I can't really give good advice on that. Ben, I'm lead engineer. I'm looking to teach the members of my team to be better at refactoring and practice design patterns. How do you come up with your scenarios? So what I try to do with my own code examples is that I try to find a good balance between code that is practical, that could potentially be like real life code, right? Could be something from production. But on the other hand, is also still simple enough that it's relatively easy to understand and to work on. And it's something that I've tried to do since the start of my YouTube channel, and try to become better at doing that, like keeping things simple, but not simple enough, and at the same time things being practical. So that means you automatically already go to the types of applications like shopping carts or other kind of tools that could in principle be like real life tools. I try to avoid things like pizza class and pizza toppings classes, which you sometimes see referred to in design patterns. I don't think that's practical and realistic enough, unless you're building an app for a pizza bakery, obviously. But I try to stick to more practical examples, and yeah, it's also, I find it a nice challenge to try and find those things and think of new examples. All right, let's see, what else do we have? I'm going to scroll down a bit. So Robert asks, how do you architect and develop a highly interconnected web app for satellite design, simulation analysis? Very interconnected, has lots of feedback loops that affect other parts of the design. So it's really important, like, to figure out how those connections are modeled. And there must be a way, even if things are highly interconnected, to still split up things and group things and organize things. Even if it's very, very complicated, and there are lots of things that are going on that are interconnected, there's like different strategies that you can try. Like, can you look at the data first, for example, and see how everything is related? What can you group together? And how can you group these things together so that communication is minimized? Kind of what you would also want to do with microservices. And basically base your design on that. So how do you organize things so that communication is minimized? And that means you're also reaching a maximum level of independency, of decoupling. So that's where I would start. MVD, thank you so much for your support. That's really kind. Let's see, what else do we have? Gems, I've learned so much from your channel. You're welcome. Glad to hear that. Are there best practices for structuring a Python code base? There are tons of best practices. They're called design principles and design patterns, and I talk a lot about them on my channel. So watch a few videos about that. I did a video about solid, grasp. I think those are good starting points, and go from there. And I also have an online course that you can follow about that. Let's see. Let's see, what else do we have? Georgios, should I use decorators for logging function method execution? Yeah, you definitely can. Decorators work pretty well for that. I've used them a couple of times for like profiling and things like that. So there's also, I think, some libraries that already allow you to do that, so you don't have to write them yourself. So that's a good use of decorators, for sure. Brian from Kigali, Rwanda, what made you jump from Java to Python? Actually, very simple. It was a question of need. So I wanted to do some things that were hard to do in Java. So and Java I mostly used for my research in the past. And I was working on, when I was teaching at the university, on a course on software design, and the rest of the program was moving to Python. So it made kind of sense for me to also do that software design course in Python, and that's how I rolled into Python, basically. I've also used Python on and off. It's not that I was solely developing Java for years and then suddenly switch. So I mean, I've used Python on and off for various little projects over the past 20 to 30 years, actually. So I've been using it for quite a while now. Dia, hi Arjan, how long do you think it takes to become a senior developer? I know that there might not be a fixed amount of time. No, there is not really a fixed amount of time. I mean, everybody progresses at a different rates, right? So that depends very much on you as a person. Also, it's not just about learning the skills. It's also sometimes about being lucky and being in the right place at the right time. You know, maybe you work at a company where they're looking for a more senior person for a specific project, and you're just at that stage where you're starting to get there. So then you might just get that job and then become a senior developer sooner. Or you might work at a company where you're basically totally stuck and you're there for 15 years and you're trying to get to the senior position, but you're simply not getting there because there is no job opening, right? So that can also happen. I think typically senior developers, it's between 5 and 8 years of experience, something like that, rough indication. Tyler, any recommendations for learning or gaining exposure to widely used project design structures with Python MVC, repository pattern, etc., etc.? So those are maybe more architectural patterns, I'd say, so that if you want to work on those patterns, then you need to work on larger systems. Now, part of it is I don't think you have to build those things from scratch. I think it's more interesting to learn about how they're being used and applied in various systems already. So it might already be good where you're part of a project that uses these design structures. So MVC, a typical application, is of course a GUI application. So that's where you would use that. But also other types of patterns like a pipeline pattern would be something that you would see more in data processing systems. Event-based architectures, if you're doing more things like working with Elasticsearch. So I would look for those technologies and then start there. Let's see. Manuel, thanks for the content. Highly appreciate it. You're most welcome. Glad to hear you like it. Teras, helped me clean up a lot of the code I wrote as junior level developer. Nice. Good to hear. And you even cleaned up the code from senior developers. That's what we want to see, obviously. Artie, what major advantages do you see Python having over JavaScript as a server-side language or vice versa? I think one big advantage of Python is that it has very little boilerplate. So as opposed to Java, which is a very empty language, so to speak, you always need extra modules, node modules and things like that to actually be able to use it successfully. Whereas Python has already a lot of the stuff built in. So I think that's a major advantage of using Python, especially in the backend. Now you still might use some libraries, you know, like the requests package, or if you're building an API, you're going to need some sort of API framework. So it's not like you don't have to install anything, but Python typically requires less boilerplate code in my experience. So that means that you're also probably going to get set up more quickly. And another nice thing that I like about Python is because there is already so much in the Python standard library that there's also more structure in, let's call it, standard solutions to problems. Because often when you're looking for some solution, then it uses the standard library, and that means you can just copy paste the code and it works. You don't have to install any extra dependencies or things like that. So there's a lot of content out there that's you can just use directly without having to install a bunch of stuff, and that's also a really nice advantage of Python. So let's see. Aditya asks, what's the best design pattern for data migration. So yeah, it depends a bit from what you're migrating from and to, and what order. But you probably want to look into things like the adapter pattern, where you need to provide like a compatibility layer so that your old code can actually still work with a new structure while you're providing the adapter, and then you can slowly do the refactoring and reorganize things. Trying again my camera. It's giving me lots of trouble this time around. Taras asks, have you made or are you planning to make a video detailing your journey as a software engineer? Would love to hear what beliefs you had to discard over the years and which you've had to adopt. Actually, that's funny because I recorded a video kind of like that a couple of weeks ago, and that's going live after the Code Roast Part 2. So this Friday is the second part of the Code Roast that I did, and the next week I'm going to talk about my failures. And basically talking a bit about my own experience, creating a startup company, making lots of mistakes, doing lots of things wrong, and learning from that. And that's going to come out after this week, actually. So I'm going to talk more about that. Actually, that's something I'm thinking about doing a bit more from time to time. Like a lot of my videos, they focus on me, being together with like the VS Code editor, doing code examples, explaining things, refactoring. I think that's nice. I like doing those types of videos, but I want to experiment a bit more with a different kind of format soon on the channel, and also do a bit more, just talking and just sharing experiences and ideas related to software development, being a software engineer, what it actually means to be a software engineer, and just talking about some things from my own experience. And I think that could be fun actually to do more of those things. So stay tuned for more of that. Luke, just want to say thanks. You're most welcome. You've been recommending my videos to your reportees working with data analytics for improving healthcare. Oh, that's good to hear. That's so cool. Awesome. Let's see. Ali Reza, hi Arjan, do you see Python being replaced by a new technology in the near future? In the near future, no. I mean, there's tons of new technologies, like new languages coming out all the time, or things, like Mojo, for example, or Rust, or things like that. And I mean, currently Python is like, next to JavaScript, the most popular language in the world. I don't think for the coming years it's going anywhere, especially since every year there's also a new version of Python. There's tons of people working on it, making it better. So I don't think you have to be afraid that within a year Python is going to be irrelevant. What I always find funny is that sometimes I get on my YouTube channel like these people that comment things like, I was stop doing Python, start using a real language, and then some random language that they think is a real language, which I find so funny because like half of the world actually runs on Python. So not calling it a real language is, I'd say, a bit naive. Anyway, so I don't think it's going to be replaced. I think it's going to be improved. I do think there might be a new language that comes around that's going to be better, and maybe everybody will shift to that at some point. But I don't see that happening anytime soon, to be honest. Especially now with all the AI tools, where Python is like in a really good position to be like the tool to use. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. Let's see. Jose, hi Arjan. Would you ever make a course with a different base language? TypeScript is the language in question. Well, that's interesting because, you know, I'm working on my software architecture course, and there is going to be a TypeScript component in there. So that's not just going to be Python. And the reason I'm doing that is that on the one hand, I think software architecture is something that's not language specific, it's more about systems. So I want to show software architecture using different languages. That's one reason. And the second reason is that I also like TypeScript a lot, and I think it gives me opportunity in the terms of software architecture to talk about when to use TypeScript versus when to use Python and vice versa. So there's something coming. Let's see. Georgios, have you experienced yourself or your coworkers being drawn to comfort zone solutions in software engineering decisions, even if they're suboptimal? Oh, absolutely. It's even a question of whether those solutions are actually comfort zone solutions or whether that's just a good practice. You know, if you have experience with a particular tool, and that means that you can move faster because you know that tool already, that has a lot of benefits. Because in many cases, when you're writing software, you're going to have to throw it out of the window anyway in a month when things change again. You have to redo things and do things differently. So being able to move fast and just use the tools that you know and you use them well, I don't see any particular issue with that. Now, it's a problem, of course, if you are stuck with a certain set of tools that is no longer maintained or that don't integrate well anymore with the current status quo. And then that's problematic because then you're going to introduce complications in your code because you're basically behind on what the best way is of doing certain things. So there's a balance between trying to keep up to date, but also don't be afraid to use the tools that you know, because you can simply move faster that way. Let's see. Stephen, hi Arjan, been enjoying Next Level Python course. Great, good to hear. Question, what are important factors to consider when deciding to go with microservices versus monolith in API design? If you're designing API, I'd say start with a monolith and only move to microservices if you have a really good reason for it. I think that's the most important thing. It's so important to keep things simple for yourself. I think that's just really crucial. And as soon as you move to microservices, you really run the risk of just complicating your life a lot. So I'd say that start with a monolith and only move to microservices if that's really something that you have a good reason to do. Crypto, do you think Java will die off? Android has been moving to Kotlin for a while now. I think Java is still a use case for maintaining legacy Android apps for those who are interested in it. I think Java is a good example of a language that is like everywhere in lots of different places. So I don't think it will die off anytime soon. I mean, we even see that there is still some like really old code written in COBOL and things like that that's still out there. So, and I'm also not sure what is going to come in terms of the Java world. Maybe there's going to be a new version that's, it's going to be set up slightly differently. That's going to solve some of the problems with Java being quite verbose and things like that. So, I don't know. Personally, I've not used Java for quite a while, so I don't know what's going to happen. John asks, do you know of any well-written Python API wrappers or clients that would be a good reference to follow when building one from scratch? In my case, this is to interact with a network inventory system. So yeah, the one that I use most is FastAPI, and that works really well. Brian, which database language do you think is best suited to use with Python? I don't think there's a particular database language that's useful for Python specifically. Python does have certain tools that work quite well, like SQL Alchemy, so SQL-based database is a great option. But there's also PyMongo if you're more for a NoSQL kind of approach, and that also works quite well. But I do feel that the SQL side of things is a bit more developed than the Mongo side of things. At least I know more tools and libraries in that area. Whereas with TypeScript, I feel like this is more in balance. So you have more ORAMs that are both, NoSQL and SQL database focused, like Prisma, for example. So like Dieter also mentioned, like the database language that you pick, that should indeed be determined by the project that you're doing. Sometimes a SQL database is a better option for you, and sometimes NoSQL works better, right? Luke, I'd love to hear your thoughts with experience with team environments and efficiently managing projects. Often a major bottleneck is effectively sharing workloads. Yeah, I've worked mainly with small teams, and we've always had the problem that there's just like way too many things that we want to do, and you have to really prioritize a lot, and that's hard. That's really hard. So, and also if you're a small team, it's tempting to go all in on Scrum and all kinds of development processes that are maybe way overkill for your very small team. And then it works maybe better to do like a limited version of that, or take some aspects of these different methodologies to just keep things simple and manageable for you as a team. So there's also that. Joskin, how important are soft skills for software developers? This is something that is often overlooked, but I firmly believe that soft skills are often more important than technical skills. Yeah, I'd say the further you progress in your career, the more important these soft skills are going to be. Because if you're a senior engineer, you're going to have to do code reviews, you're going to have to talk with management about priorities for the development team and things like that. And then, of course, it's very important to be able to communicate properly and also translate the very technical details that you're sometimes dealing with to people who might not be in that same technical domain. So you have to explain things in a way that makes sense to a wider group of people and still conveying the important thing that you want to convey. So that's definitely important. The further you come in your career, the more important that's going to be. So yeah, and that's also what I noticed myself. Basically, it's especially with ArjanCodes, there's like a small team, and that's mostly people who don't have a technical background. Like I've worked with somebody that helps me with marketing, with sales. So those people don't have a technical background. So I have to make sure that the things that I do, that I can explain it to them in terms that make sense to somebody who's not a programmer, right? And that's always the skill that you have to look for. All right, so I'm going to close the session again for tonight. It's 10 p.m. here in the Netherlands, and tomorrow morning I have to bring my kids to school very early in the day, so I'm going to try and get some sleep. It was really lovely talking to you again tonight, and I hope I will be able to do a live stream soon, hopefully next month. If you have any questions in the meantime, just you can send me an email or post them under the community post, and then I'll hopefully get to them next time. Thanks for joining, and wish you a great evening, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.